Welcome to So You Think You Can Date, a podcast for those ready to do dating differently. I'm Nicki Pappas, a queer, poly, millennial mom who is dating again for the first time in 15 years. What could go wrong? LOLs. While lots can go wrong, and has, a lot has also gone really well. The So You Think You Can Date podcast is about my adventures in dating. You don't have to hold the identities I hold to benefit from the life experiences I share here. Let's talk about communication, connection, and consent, regardless of what type of relationship you are in or looking for. With vulnerability, authenticity, and curiosity, I'm exploring unfamiliar terrain and would love for you to join me. In this 10th and potentially final episode, I'm going to talk about a bad date. Well, I'll actually share about more than one bad date, but I'll end by talking about a date that was full of so many red flags that I should have walked out in the first few minutes, but I ignored my intuition. At the top, I want to provide a warning about some traumatic experiences that will come up. There is the potential for a listener to be triggered as I recount a couple of bad dates that included violations of my boundaries. Keep this in mind as you listen. Please take care of yourself, have some water, take a walk, breathe deeply as needed. I'll begin with a bad coffee date that wasn't even that bad, but I'll use it to build up to the worst. So coffee date and I met up and I had to buy my own coffee, which is still always so weird to me for a first date. If you ask me out, I just assume that you intend to pay for my drink, but that's not always the case. Coffee date then had nothing of substance to bring to the table conversationally. He was an active listener, which was nice, but when I asked him questions, he didn't have much to offer. Now, I understand there can be lots of reasons for this, and some of those reasons can be out of his control to some degree, so I leave room for that. However, it's always draining to feel like I have to be the one to carry the conversation. When a date hinges on my ability to keep it going, that's just too much responsibility. Now, I'd recently gone on my mushroom journey, and I had included something about this in my bio on the dating app, so the guy asked me about it. I talked at length about psychedelics, so he may think back on this date and think it was a bad one too. I mean, he could easily tell people. I went out with this one weird woman who just talked about shrooms the whole time. I don't think he thought it was strange though, because I did tell him that if he didn't contribute more to the dialogue, I would just keep talking about mushrooms, and he responded that he found it fascinating and asked me out for a second date. We never met up again though. Next is a date defined by some low-level catfishing. So Catfisher and I had exchanged a few messages, and most of his pictures, he looked really cute. I did notice that the last picture looked a bit different than the rest, but I thought it was just the beard and big sunglasses, so I didn't think too much about it. I thought he was funny too, so that always helps. Well, when we met up for coffee, which I had to pay for because these men don't know how to pay for a coffee date, I was shocked. I could tell that the pictures on his profile were him, but they were much younger. Turns out that last picture more closely resembled what he presently looked like. Now, I know that some stories of catfishing are truly awful, so I definitely don't want to make this seem like that big of a deal. But as someone who values authenticity so highly, I don't like when I feel like people have misrepresented themselves. I could give him the benefit of the doubt and say that I know that some people truly don't care about outward appearance at all. If he's one of those people, then he may not even give a second thought to his own appearance and the discrepancy in how he currently looks compared to the majority of his photos. I mean, I doubt this is the case, but maybe. Even still, I just didn't like showing up somewhere and being caught off guard that the person who met me barely resembled the person whose pictures I had seen. Moving right along, let's talk about the guy who fucked me without a condom. I mentioned him in episode 8, So You Want to Stop Fucking with Fuckboys. No condom is someone who I had to tell to wear a condom when we had sex. I'm going to pull the clip from episode 8 where I talked about it so I don't have to say it all again. There's one guy I went out with who I told needed to wear a condom when we had sex. He said he was fine with not wearing one since I'm on birth control and each of us had negative results from our latest STI testing. I maintained that I still wanted him to wear one. The night we had sex, he wore a condom the first time we tried to have sex. However, having the condom on was uncomfortable for him. He told me he wasn't used to wearing one because the other people he's had sex with were fine with him not wearing one. He also tried to use his job as a physician assistant to establish more trust and convince me that it was okay to have sex without a condom. I told him again that I wanted him to wear the condom. He went to the bathroom and he told me that he was putting on another condom. When he came back, I assumed he was wearing one. We had sex and then I realized that he had, in fact, not put another condom on. I said something to him about it and he acted like it wasn't a big deal. He said that he didn't mean any disrespect by it, but that he was just struggling too much to have sex with the condom on. I knew then that I did not want to see him again. He messaged me on the app a couple of days later. Hey there, really enjoyed meeting you the other night. Would it be easier if we got each other's numbers instead of using this app? I replied, while I enjoyed meeting you and had a great time, I'm not interested in exchanging numbers. I established a boundary around wearing a condom. In the end, you didn't. I know you didn't mean any harm. However, I did feel disrespected and like my trust was broken the more I thought about it. I wish you well on your journey though. His response was, that's understandable. No worries. You're right. I certainly meant no harm by it. So I sincerely apologize for that aspect of our time together. Best of luck, Nicki. My work bestie pointed out that I should not have said that I knew he didn't mean any harm because he absolutely did, no matter how many times he says he didn't and no matter how earnestly he said it. I'm sure he thinks that he's one of the good guys. However, when I shared this story with a close group of my friends during our monthly call, one of my friends who's a therapist shared about how that type of behavior is part of rape culture, and I started crying. That's what it took for me to really understand how serious the situation was and how much he violated me. Okay, so the only thing I will add now is that I read the beginning of some sample chapters that my friend Edie sent me for an upcoming book of hers called Reconstructing Sexual Ethics. Edie is from Australia, and she wrote, in several Australian states, it is illegal to stealth a condom. And if a condom is removed without the consent of all parties involved in the sex act, this would be considered sexual assault, a transgression of the law, punishable with a hefty fine. So, I would say this was more than just a bad date. One could argue this was the worst, and I wouldn't disagree, but it's not the one I'm going to end on. Let's talk about Chuck E. Cheese, who we could just call Chucky for short. So I've been confronting my pattern of being attracted to men with an avoidant attachment style. I mean, this wasn't the first time I'd confronted this pattern, just the most recent time. Chucky definitely wasn't an avoidant, so I decided to give it a try. When he texted me the address for where to meet him for our first date, I typed it in. This man sent me the address for fucking Chuck E. Cheese. He said, we can start here. When I texted a friend of mine about this and his whole we can start here, she replied, and we'll be ending here. The more I thought about it though, the more I realized that this man just thinks he's a comedian. There was no way this was his plan. I predicted that he just wanted me to think he was taking me there, but that we'd actually grab coffee at the shop a few doors down, and I was correct. As we walked to the coffee shop, he asked me if I'd been there. I said yes, on a bad date. It just so happens the bad date was the one I talked about at the beginning of this episode where I talked about mushrooms the whole time. Chucky then told me that he'd also been on a bad date there and proceeded to bash the woman he'd met, citing that she hadn't put any effort into how she looked. There was something about how he said it that just didn't sit well with me. Once we were inside though, things quickly took a turn for the worst. He told me he was glad that I looked like my verified picture because I just looked basic in my other photos. When my jaw dropped a little, this man had the audacity to repeat, "Ya basic, girl." I'm not a dating expert, but I'll go out on a limb here to say that it's probably good advice across the board to avoid making comments like this about your date's appearance. Now, the real kicker is that in my other pictures, I was showing myself doing things that I love, like performing at an open mic and climbing a rock wall. In those pictures, my hair wasn't as blonde as it currently is and as it is in the verified picture. So I think that he was getting at the fact that he was glad my hair looks the way it does now. But that's still just so rude to say to someone. Though I should have left, I stayed. When I asked him what he usually gets, he told me and asked me what I usually get. I replied that I always order one of the pecan pie tarts. This man then told me that I could not order what I normally get. Now, in his dating profile, he states that he is a brat tamer. My assumption is that he was trying to bring that energy to our interactions to see how hard it would be to, quote, tame me. Knowing this about him, I didn't put up any fight because I already knew I wasn't interested in ever seeing him again. In the type of dating that he's wanting with that dynamic of a brat tamer and brat, I knew enough to know that trust has to be established. You don't get to show up on a first date trying to tame someone who has not consented to that behavior. I could have just left, but I was worried about him trying to follow me because I had such a bad feeling in my gut about him. We ordered some pastries and he said that he thought we could spend 2 to 3 hours there. I'm sorry, but that is just too long for a first date. The only guy that I'm currently seeing told me once that he knows within an hour on a first date if he wants to have a second date with someone. So he doesn't think first dates should be more than an hour. I like this and have tried to stick to this as closely as I can. Granted, I know within the first 5 minutes if I want a second date. Okay, so once Chucky and I were sitting down, he talked nonstop for almost half an hour, and most of it was about his ex-wife. I don't have any problem with someone mentioning their ex. However, something felt off about the way he was talking about her. At one point, he blurted out that he is selfish, and he was owning it as part of his commitment to radical transparency. While I value radical transparency, I just wasn't interpreting his words and behaviors as radically transparent. Again, something felt off about making sure to communicate that you are selfish to someone you're having a first date with. I will say that by him emphatically telling me this, I knew to believe him, per the famous Maya Angelou quote, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." I understand that we are all selfish to a degree, and I recognize selfishness in myself, but I just couldn't shake the funny feeling I had about Chucky saying this to me and the way he said it. He also told me that he gets attached to people quickly and could already feel that happening with me as he was smitten. I think that he thought I would like to hear this, but it caused my guard to go up. As the temperature started dropping, he pitched the idea to me of getting in his car to ride with him to the next activity. I cannot believe this man thought I would get in the car with a complete stranger to go somewhere else. I've watched the shows. I know how this goes. I declined and we moved inside to talk some more. Once inside, there was some talk equity as I got to share a little more about myself. When I realized, though, that we'd been there 2 hours, I wrapped up the date and he walked me to my car. Once at my car, he asked if he could kiss me. I knew he was going to ask and had been trying to figure out what to say that would keep me safe. I brought up how he told me that he gets attached quickly, and if this was our only date, I didn't want him to feel like I had led him on. He said he wouldn't and then kissed me. The kissing was actually really good, so I relaxed a little. He ended up picking me up and we kept kissing. However, when I asked him to put me down, he asked why instead of just listening to me. That was the final red flag for me. If I can't trust you to listen to me in a public place, I sure as hell am not going to go anywhere private with you. He then asked if he'd earned my phone number because up to that point, we'd only been messaging through the app. I told him that I would think about it, knowing good and well that I would not be giving Chucky my number. I was too nervous to tell him that though because, again, I didn't want him to follow me. He messaged me on the app later to say that we didn't have to talk more that night. He just wanted to know that I made it home safely. He then said that he was going to take a step back and let me reach out to him when I was ready. Instead of waiting for me to reach out, he messaged me again a few days later to ask if I could share my thoughts on our first date and to set up a second date. If he can't even respect his own boundary, I would not be able to trust him to respect my boundaries. I told him that I wasn't interested in a second date or pursuing anything romantic with him because there were things that felt off about the vibe between us. I explained that I didn't think it would be helpful to relay the specifics. Instead of accepting that, he said that he thought it would be helpful to tell him and offered to provide me with feedback for my podcast in exchange. That's right. He'd been listening to this podcast and he still might be. Hell, he might even listen to this episode and there's nothing I can do about that except wish him the best. Okay, well, I said I was going to end on a really bad date, but I've decided to close out by sharing about the dates I went on with this guy after No Condom and Chucky. We'll call this guy Traveler because he's always traveling for work and he wanted me to be the woman that he met up with when he's in the area where I live. The first time I met Traveler, I told him that I had just had 2 bad dating experiences, meaning No Condom and Chucky. I gave him a brief recap of each and said that I wouldn't be ready to have sex with him and that I wanted to take things slow. He said he understood. Well, as the date went on, he got increasingly handsy with me to the point where I removed his hand from my leg. Back at my car, he kissed me and got handsy again. I should have let that be my sign, but I decided to have a second date with him. On that second date, we went to dinner at a restaurant that overlooks a river, and then we went for a walk by that river. As it cooled off, he suggested we get drinks somewhere or go back to his hotel. When I said no about the hotel because then he'd just want to have sex, he was confused about why that was a problem. When I reminded him that I wanted to take things slow, he pushed back that he knew I said we wouldn't have sex on the first date, but nothing about taking things slow. We sat and talked, and he said that he enjoyed spending time with me and was fine with taking things slow, but I already knew I wasn't interested in seeing him again. We texted afterwards, and I ended things, stating that I was still needing to process the violations I'd experienced. He replied, "I hope you know all guys aren't assholes." I really hate when guys not all men me. Like, I'm not dumb. I know not all men. Ugh. Anyways, he wants to be friends, but I'm not interested in that either. With this, I am informing you all that your girl has officially given up dating for the present moment. I'm still seeing one person as of the time of this recording, but will not be seeking out anyone new. I paused my account on the dating app I was on, and I ended all my other connections. I've learned so much while navigating these new waters and dating, and I'm just going to pull back to process. Though dating has been painful at times, I'm grateful for this outlet here through the podcast to connect with you all, and I appreciate your support. I'm sending you big love, friends. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the So You Think You Can Date podcast. Make sure to subscribe to So You Think You Can Date. rate and review the show on all the platforms, and share this episode with someone that you think would enjoy it and who is ready to do dating differently. Also, you can now order my new book, Coming of Age and Coming Out, Stories of Repressed and Reclaimed Sexual Desire. You can order a signed copy today by visiting nickipappas.com/shop, or you can order a copy on Amazon. I'm still working on getting the book available through other outlets. Coming of Age and Coming Out is a collection of stories about coming of age from childhood through adolescence and then coming out in my 30s as queer and non-monogamous. If you order a signed copy from me, you will receive a free download of the Come Alive guide in your inbox. If you want to follow my writing, you can subscribe to my Substack that is called Coming Alive, where I write about pursuing all that makes us come alive. Per the Howard Thurman quote, "Don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive and go do it, because what the world needs is people who have come alive." You can follow me on Instagram at Broadening the Narrative, which is the account I started in 2019 to document my journey in broadening the narratives or stories that I was taught about myself and others. There may be some bonus episodes of So You Think You Can Date, so stay tuned.